So thank you everyone for joining us today for our event, Driving Retail Innovation, Exploring Retailtech Solutions in APAC. So my name is Josie, so I'm a senior consultant at Storm5. What we do is that we help find senior talents for companies across all sorts of retail tech companies. Like you might, not know what that means, but that includes anything from e-commerce SaaS, e-commerce platforms, fashion tech companies, logistic companies, even like, travel tech, and the list goes on. So yeah, during this webinar, we'll be covering three main points. The first one will be to discover the latest trends and challenges in the APAC retail market. Second would be to explore innovative retail tech solutions designed to enhance customer experience, streamline operations, as well as drive growth. And lastly, we'll be talking about how to gain valuable insights from our industry experts here and the thought leaders who have successfully implemented retail tech solutions in the APAC region. Just a quick note for the audience, if you do have any questions, like throughout the session, please do submit them in the comment section and we'll be able to answer them in the end. So yeah, let's just kick this off with an introduction of our panelists today and their companies. So be great if you kick us off, Brendan. Maybe you can give a short introduction for us to understand a bit more about your experience, introduction about your company and your kind of background within the retail industry in APAC.
Thanks, Josephine. My name's Brendan. I'm from What's That? So my background spans about 20 years in private equity startups in various industries. Prior to that, I worked in IT, OEM for retail and wholesale, telecommunications, and the last about 15, 20 years is in loyalty, affiliate marketing, cashback, and rewards programs. My main focus has been on disruptive technologies, developing a clicks to bricks and a mobile payment solutions for small local merchants, especially with the influence of COVID is driving consumers in store to local stores. Their awareness isn't the same as a large retailer or a large FMCG brand. My motto, it's to never play retail. I'm a discount shopper. I love deals. I always wanted to have a smart shop in my pocket. Hey, Simon, can you find me a deal in the late 50K radius? I maybe want children's shirts. I've got school coming up. Is it in store? Is it online? And for me, it's always about connecting online to in-store, save time and money for retailers and increase the customer experience. I guess that's which is my company and our values.
Yep, great. Thank you so much. Maybe we can go with Charles next.
Thank you, Josephine. Good morning, all. My name is Charles, or evening, depending where you are. My name is Charles. My background is primarily in applied statistics. I worked in finance for about 25 years before moving into technology. About 10 years ago, and specifically started with online retail-ready technology. So I helped to develop and spread online some early basket recapture technology. The type of technologies where you would be reminded that you had forgotten something in your basket, and it had some key stroke capture technology, which was pretty neat and fun to work on. Recently, I've been working on my company called Delvify that's pushing innovation in, I think, a pretty super interesting space of data extraction to optimize material supply. So data is getting much richer. Users are demanding sort of real insight, and the data that you can get from online retail and e-commerce is not limited to just what someone is buying, but really the features of interactions and materials and a whole other host of data that has not yet been readily exploited and can yield, I think, a lot of insight going forward for the right companies.
Perfect. And lastly, we have Saurabh.
Yep. Over to you, Saurabh.
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can now. Yeah.
I guess the internet cut down. At the moment, I was about to introduce myself. Good, I'm back now. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Josephine. My name is Saurabh Jeet, or you can just call me Saurabh if that's too many consonants. I work at a company called Cube Asia, which I founded last year. And we focus on providing research, data, and insights for the e-commerce space in Southeast Asia. My work history is about 15 years. 10 of those were spent at McKinsey & Company, which is, as many of you may know, a global consulting firm, and I was with them in Southeast Asia towards the end of my time focusing on e-commerce, helping to build new businesses. And in that time, I had also had the chance to work with a couple of clients to build e-commerce and online businesses in countries like Thailand, Myanmar, and others in the region. The company I founded last year, co-founded last year with my co-founder, is called Cube, and it really responds to the need for businesses to have better data so that they can make better decisions in what to sell, where to sell, how much to price their products, and also strategic decisions around business planning for the month, the year ahead, etc. Very excited to be here. Back to you, Joseph.
Great. Thank you so much for the introductions. Yeah, so let's just kick this off with some questions that we have and some topics around it. So maybe you share any insights or trends that you've observed regarding the adoption and the impact of retail tech in specific countries or regions within the APAC market? So we can start off with Charles. You're muted. Yeah.
There we go. It's kind of hard to generalize because there are so many regions, so many cultures, so many different ways of interacting in APAC, and different levels of development. So, you know, you have countries that have very low usage rates of laptop and desktop computers and do everything entirely on mobile phones. So thinking of places like Indonesia or Philippines to a certain extent, or you've got countries like Korea and Japan, which, you know, although they use mobile phones, don't use it really in the same way. So it's hard to sort of generalize. And marketplaces are really popular. I mean, they're popular obviously around the world, but some of them are more popular in different ways. So Brendan, I think, was talking about discounting. So that's obviously leads a lot of the, you know, a lot of the conversation around what e-commerce should look like and what it should deliver in many countries here. But, you know, some of the markets are trying to move up more towards higher value add and pushing solutions to extract insight from, you know, from data, both offline and combining it with sort of online. I think Sarabjit sort of mentioned a little bit of that in the planning and the data, and I'd like to hear some of his ideas and about sort of predictive technologies and demand forecasting, because the one thing that we seem to really lack in a big way in a lot of the space is really good predictive, you know, predictive analytics. So we worked with a company who said to us, look, we use social media and we use different types of advertising, but once the customers get in store, you know, we want to be able to connect that activity to what they're doing in store. And once they're in store, when they're looking at things, how can we connect them again when they're offline? So how can we predict what they're doing through the entire customer journey? So we worked with them trying to deliver so what we call sort of this photo matching technology. So you take a picture of something and it matches to something similar. And so when they're in store, we can kind of connect them with recommendations that they can take and use later. But that predictive bit, I think, is the real interesting space that we need to see more of.
Got it. Have you seen any, you know, any trends or any insights that you've particularly seen in Japan specifically?
You know, Japan's it's a really strange place because in some ways it seems very antiquated. They still use fax machines quite frequently, and paper is quite a big place. But they have been really fast to adopt for online every type of particular gizmo and gimmick that you can think of for online, and really tried to tailor them to domestic markets. So doing you know, if you're doing, for example, basket capture technology or reminders, you're trying to make it so there's not too many. So instead of just buying off the shelf solutions, they usually work with their vendors to really try and help tailor exactly what. So there's a lot of this tailor-made stuff. So when you approach the Japanese market, you get you know, you get much more of a desire from the customers so your customers to tailor and remake some of it. So this, you know, the digital transformation is still just beginning to happen around the world. In Japan's, I think, one place. I think Brendan knows a little bit about the digital transformation as well.
All right, thanks, Charles. You mentioned the digital transformation and the personification, like websites with AI, promotion, pricing, forecast. I think from my experience in Australia, working with affiliate marketing and with larger retailers to do in-store deals that are purchased online, like a click and collect, there seems to be a real division between the online and the in-store team inside a company. Which company gets the sale? I mean, the online person wants to market it. Do they have the budget? The in-store person gets the sale for the click and the collect. And then there's the upsell value. Was it an online sale that then generated another in-store sale? From our discussions with retailers, they have a big divide. It's very hard. If you're not all aligned across the company and that transformation and convergence between digital, e-commerce and in-store bricks and mortar, that seems to be a problem. I've also noticed there's quite a bit of fad about like generative AI and what the metrics behind it are. A few years ago, it was beacons in store. You know, you walk into your department chain store, a beacon will go off using geodemographic location. It would alert of a high value customer. Our company designed some scripting for staff that could send the staff to find that person and give them a customized experience. And again, how do you measure that? And how does that go across? Who gets the sale? So I guess from the customized consumer experience point of view, there's a lot of work that needs to go to get that seen from A, B, C, all the way right through. Thank you.
Great.
Maybe I'll just add perhaps one point from my side, which is from Southeast Asia's perspective, it's a super exciting, very fast growing region. And specifically, the area we look at is e-commerce. The one broad trend, though, is that e-commerce today here is different from what it was 10 years ago, in that one, the growth has slowed down, and two, the landscape's much more complex, where a seller today no longer just has the choice of one or two big marketplaces, but has many, many different channels to choose from, which leads to more complexity in so many different ways. The implication of that is what I would say perhaps the rise of tools, which is just sellers having access to different tools, ranging from management of the different marketplaces, management of their products, marketing analytics, and data, which we've covered in different ways as well. And just to share an interesting data point, which is a few months ago, I'd come across a Twitter post which was forwarded to by my colleague actually, which had listed that an online reseller in the US listed all of the tools that they were using, and there were 40 in number, which ranged from analytics, product management, payment, etc. And in comparison, the sellers that we're talking to in Southeast Asia are using closer to 5 to 10 or so. So we can talk about it later, but this trend towards just using tools to enhance the seller capabilities and brands capabilities, and therefore be able to maximize how you use that complexity and the different channels available to you. That's an important trend.
Great, thank you. Yeah, a lot of great insights and different trends around the different areas in APAC. So yeah, maybe moving on to the next question. Could you just share any success stories or any case studies from your career that highlight how Retailtech Solutions have transformed the retail landscape in the APAC region? Yeah, maybe Sarab can take this one first.
Sure. Thanks, Josephine. Maybe I'll pick one that's really close to our time. So in Southeast Asia, TikTok Shop is like one of the most exciting trends of our time. The e-commerce landscape has, in the last decade or so, been dominated by two marketplaces, Shopee and Lazada. And you would say kind of out of nowhere, TikTok Shop has come up and really eaten into for these platforms share specifically for beauty and fashion. And it's unique in that TikTok is a big phenomenon around the world, but outside of Southeast Asia, the e-commerce channel is very small. But here though, the experience that they've offered in e-commerce is it's a content-led experience, so live shopping and videos, and that's really found a lot of A, demand, and B, also TikTok has motivate, or TikTok has incentivized sellers to do more hours of live streaming. The more they do, the more discount vouchers or shipping vouchers they get that they can offer their customers. What that led to, interestingly, is some brands live selling for 8, 12, 16 hours a day, and in some cases even more than 24, because they would set up multiple accounts to sell online. So one success story that comes to mind is now that is a significant cost for brands, and we've spoken to some brands who are now kind of going the other way, who said we don't need to do the full 24 hours, 16 hours. Let's look at which are the hours when our competitors are doing. Let's look at which are the hours when the user engagement is the highest, and then choose the specific live selling hours a little bit more carefully so that we can balance not only the incentives we get from the platform and also the ability to really get customers, get good engagement, get good sales, not have to compete with so many other sellers doing selling, so on and so forth. So that's an important example, because for us, it highlights the power of just data and optimization. That is no longer about doing everything because you can't. You have to pick and choose, and how we see brands using data to make that choice.
I really love that subject, because I think one of the things that when we talk about e-commerce is we tend to focus on the website experience. So what it is that when you go on site, what do you see, what do you do, how do we have a predictive pricing model per se. But really there's another part of it that always needs to be remembered, and that's how you're getting customers to your site in the first place. So part of the retail experience is this advertising part, and that often is put in another bucket, but really it should be part of the entire experience, because if you're thinking of your funnel, right, which you're bringing people into the funnel, you bring them in primarily through advertising or word of mouth, and then they go through that. So, one of the things that our subsidiary Delphify Ads has been doing is trying to really use the data from retail experiences to drive, awareness in particular for customers as they're going through their day. So what do I mean by that? Well, now the technology has evolved really in a really clever way that you can start to deliver insights on where people are at sort of a meter level, or even a more granular level. So what direction people are walking in when they go past a store, how many people might go inside a store, and you're creating cohorts and you're advertising to people who might go into your retail experience, or passing by a competitor, and you want to bring them to your store. And so being able to use that sort of insight, you can then optimize your own retail experience. So when are people passing by? When can you bring them in? And potentially, if you're linking this also to your on-ground intelligence, so what other competitors are offering, you can then see what people are being attracted to in other stores, and then optimize your own, your own retail experience, but also your own inventory. So this data then becomes this continual learning process where you have people coming in store, you're kind of figuring out, you're never following an individual per se, you're following a cohort or an audience, right? And you're seeing what your audiences are doing in a particular city or area, using that to feed back into your inventory, and perhaps even you're using adaptive creatives on your advertising campaigns to really test out lots of different creatives. So all of this data sort of gets mixed into one big pile, and you really need very good, data wranglers or data scientists, or people who understand at least how the parts can fit together, so you can really create that powerful, really enjoyable, because at the end of the day, we're trying to create enjoyment, right, for our customers. So I think that's the real power that comes in.
Thanks, Charles. That was great. You mentioned the point about inventory. I just wanted to add from the back end side, looking at supply chain management, integration, the amount of customer data that we now collect and store. And we store not just in our company, but in our third parties and downstream. On a personal experience, I had a good success and a failure. We developed a solution in a mobile app that would deliver an e-gift card instantly in store if you purchased it, and you could barcode scan at the local grocery store and you got a discount. That was great. However, we relied on APIs from a third party to instantly issue that e-gift card. They had some old back-ended APIs from a legacy system that was still open. So we had a fraud attack come through. Our banks, of course, caught it, but that retailer, which is a third party, not our systems, had an open, and that just recently happened to move it. You'll see it on the news. There was an old API that got hacked and therefore information got leaked. This brings up that cybersecurity as we start looking at total chain integration and third-party supply chain management. There are legacy systems, old APIs out there, and there's a lot of data that can be hacked on consumers. So I think it's a major landscape changer. It's just in-store convergence, online convergence, and supply chain management. How do we look at the cyber threat? What's the risk of consumer information? The more we collect and know about people, the more that someone can hack.
Right. Great. Yeah, let's move on to the next one. So this is a bit about, what kind of areas should we be, driving retail innovation from? So should the focus be on established and successful global retail tech solutions that prove to work? Or should we focus more on developing region-specific solutions tailored to unique needs and preferences of consumers in APAC specifically? So maybe you can just share a bit about this, the perspective on driving retail tech innovations.
I guess it's my turn. I don't believe there's any one clear solution. I mean, from a global scale, if you look at companies like Nike, etc., that are right across every country, there's a cost and ROI of new systems. I mean, each country will have a specific market, not all the same systems. Some have legacy systems, some use different internal, external advertising. And again, it's what modes you're looking at. China and the adoption of mobile commerce versus Australia, where we're much further behind. Then there's the density of the population. So each solution could be global, but I believe it needs to be tailored somewhat to the local area. And marketing teams are not always skilled in digital transformation. Do they test and learn? Are they measured on the net promotion, the sales number, loyalty, ROI, etc.? So looking at that from a region specific, each particular smaller company or larger company may have a different set of metrics.
I'd fully agree with Brendan. So Southeast Asia is often spoken about as a region, but in reality, it's a collection of 6 big countries and 4 smaller ones. And each of these countries have very different consumer preferences, economic profiles, languages, seasons. So if we just talk about solutions, I think what we can learn globally is, let's say something like AI. We can see just how AI is being used. ChatGPT itself, as an example, is commonly accessible everywhere, but in each region, how it's used, how it's integrated, and any other solution, how you personalize it, how you expose it to the consumers, and also the benchmarks that you use to expect when it comes to feedback loops or performances of these systems do need to be tailored. And the more micro you can go, sometimes even within a single country like Indonesia, Jakarta is very different from a tier 2, tier 3 city. Just the more you can get out of it.
I really like that, Sarabjit. It's really interesting because there's a homogenization across the entire world. So as the internet and various forms of communication spread, we all sort of begin to look like one another. So what do I mean by that? So if I look at the landscape of Tokyo, it looks like the landscape of Shanghai, it looks like the landscape of Singapore, it looks like, to rougher, lesser or greater extent, like the landscape of Chicago. Like everything sort of begins to look the same, but that's really a surface level. If you go down to that deeper level, you find that there are really lots of differences. And as the competition heats up, you're trying to differentiate yourself based on smaller and smaller cohorts and smaller differentiation. So for example, if you're going to try and sell pork cutlets in Pakistan, you're going to have a little bit of a problem, probably less so in, say, China. But I think the important thing is that as you're using any sort of large global technology, that you really, as Sarabjit said, you need to adapt it to your individual customers. So when I was talking previously about the advertising solution we've now partnered with that allows you to look at data on a meter level. So you're basically looking at cell signals, cell tower signals in a very, very small meter wide area inside a city, that's a very specific area that you're looking at. It's not the whole, it's not the whole population. It's a very, very small subset of the population. And as brands start to build themselves, and before they become huge multinational global brands, they have to create some sort of an appeal to a very small specific subset. And the data that we gather from the usage helps the retailers develop their own brand. What type of customers are you looking at? Well, we know from this very small area around us, these are the type of people that are coming in. They're always coming in on this specific holiday. Therefore, we should arrange our advertising and our in-store promotions to reflect that local holiday. And you might build up your own brand around a specific holiday. For example, there's a store called The Christmas Store. So it's just around the Christian holiday of Christmas, and all they do is they sell Christmas ornaments and Christmas trees 365 days a year. That's an idea of a very specific brand. But the point is, we're getting to the space in the world where everything is going to become very, very data driven. And as you're getting data driven, you have to really think clearly about the insights you want and try and find those specific niches to go after. So your customers are not just everyone, but it's someone.
Charles, you've now had me thinking about who buys Christmas trees in July.
Well, yeah. Well, if you're a Christian in Singapore, then it's July all year round. So.
Yeah, great. I think what was really being mentioned was like using really data analytics, to tailor the kind of needs that people have within each different region. So that's really interesting. So yeah, I mean, in your opinions, what are the key challenges that retailers in the APAC region has faced when it comes to embracing and adopting these retail tech solutions? And how do they actually overcome these challenges? Maybe Charles or Brendan. Yeah,
I'll go first. From my experience in Australia, I guess I've got quite a few friends that work in some large companies. Many times the marketing team gets a pat on the back for an innovative creative ad launch done for social media, online, Facebook, Instagram. It gets awards, but the reality is the sales don't deliver. I think that's it's a challenge for retailers on how to measure those metrics and how to utilize these properly, collect the correct data. The high cost to deliver and returns. If you do a large promotion and be on shoes or something, someone gets the shoe and it doesn't quite fit them, then it comes back. That's a high cost, especially if it's online or in store. I guess the adoption of new methods like service centers for pickup and returns as opposed to shipping. From what I'm seeing, that adopting this digital transformation, a complete smart chain, or the whole way through to processing from the customer experience right through to the shipping, if you don't have something that can reduce those costs, increase the profitability, and manage that process, I guess that's one of the biggest challenges that I see here.
I think I totally agree with that. I mean, the biggest challenge really seems to be on the brand side or the retailer side, where no one wants to really define the scope of the problem, which is beyond, I want to sell more. Yes, I'm sure you want to sell more, but this sort of mindset leads to reductionist thinking. It's just, discounting and more discounting and more discounting. And I'm making a distinction between discounting and selling inexpensive goods, right? There's a big difference. So the discounting is, okay, we're going to lose money. Let's just get this out so we're not financing our inventory. That's different from we produce low cost goods that are enjoyable by our customers. So if you're just thinking about, I want to sell more, and you're down to discounting, then you spend all your time looking for companies that are going to help you fine tune the discount rates, and companies that help bundle discounts, and companies that help you finance the inventory, and companies that pester you clients with flash rates. So you're getting into this, this reductionist thinking, and you're not really beyond, what is the thing that my customers really want? What is the demand forecasting? How can I, as Brendan was talking about, optimize my supply chain so that the products that are being bought now are being reflected back to my manufacturers so they don't produce too much of whatever crap it is that people are not buying. And you can also see that reductionist thinking in sort of advertising. And I don't know how many times you go to a customer and they go, I just, what's my click rate? Like, well, that's not the only measure of how good your advertising is doing. Like, there's awareness, it was Ogilvy was said to have said, half of my advertising is wasted. Half of my advertising budget is wasted. I just don't know which half. So there's a role to play in other ways of thinking. And I think that's getting away from that reductionist thinking is probably good, and figuring out how do you build your brand as a retailer from among all the brands that you handle. How do you make your customers happy? I think Sarabjit is probably working on a lot of that as well at his company.
Excellent point, Charles. If I can offer another flavor of what you said, and perhaps also throw a question back at the same time. You said that a lot of brands don't want to go past the initial question of how to just increase my sales. The other flavor I want to perhaps test is, it's not just a case of do they want to do it or not, it's also a case of do they have the capabilities to do it or not. Because when we talk about just when we talk to our customers, what we find is in Southeast Asia, for example, there's so much innovation that's happening in the consumer space. We have a lot of young new brands that are coming up that are innovating on specific concepts in how they product ingredients, and then coming up very compelling propositions. But these companies are very scrappily run, so very lean teams. Often you'll have one visionary leader and a few people doing things, and their ability, let's say we talk to them about data, their ability to use data to make those decisions is quite limited. So we find ourselves having to, in the solutions we're developing, go past just this is what the data is, but this is what the data is saying, and this is what the insights are for your business. And I feel like even if some of the leaders of those companies may want to go past, they are just so stretched and or haven't been trained enough that there is a need for that capabilities or that gap which prevents them from doing so.
Yeah, no, I'm in total agreement with you. It's a very difficult environment when you have a model that's broken. So the retail model, by and large, particularly for garments, for example, is completely broken. It's been broken for 20 or 30 years, right? So the previous model was we would sell, we would buy lots of clothes in a full range, and we would sell those clothes, and then, the brand. So we just think of something like Ralph Lauren, for example. So Ralph Lauren comes, you've got a premium brand, you charge a premium price, you sell it. And then what happens is that later, they're under pressure to sell more. So they say, oh, well, let's sell a little bit more of this same product, but instead we'll just have a man with a horse. We will take away the Polo Ralph Lauren brand. And so then you have another tier, and then you sell all the way down in those tiers. And at that point, you're captured by the retailer, right? The manufacturer itself is only just trying to sell more and more in there. And no one's taken the time to think about how you want to create a brand and how to prevent retail capture of your brand, so that you get something like Walmart that captured the very famous discussion about Vlasic pickles. So Vlasic pickles is a type of pickle in the United States, a dill pickle in a jar. Walmart said you can sell your pickles with us, and they did, and the volumes grew enormously in the first year. And then Walmart said, well, we want a 10% discount. And Vlasic said, well, we can't, because that'll cut in their margins. And they said, well, if you don't, we're going to replace your pickles with this other brand that is just as good and will take up the same shelf space. So they then discounted it by 10%. And the next year they came back and said, we want another discount. And they kept going discount and discount, so that at one point, Vlasic was making 1 penny on each jar of pickles they were selling. So you've got on the one hand, you have these very large companies that really understand how to capture their own economies of scale. And you've got a lot of smaller companies that don't know how to, they don't have either the ability, they don't have the same customer base, or they don't have the insights into their customers to be able to offer them an alternative, something really, really interesting. Maybe you don't have the Vlasic pickles, maybe you've got some other sort of, another brand that Vlasic is offering. So the key I think for these smaller companies is to really have this a very, very sharp focus on what it is that you're trying to do. Because these very large companies can take their economies of scale and do all sorts of things, and could throw money at technologies that may or may not work. So you often see in big brands, they're buying these technologies and you see them absorb them. And then a couple of months later, Jet, I think, was one that, that was bought maybe by Walmart or Target. And then they closed it. It was an online marketplace. They closed it down about 2 or 3 years later. A small company, a smaller retailer can't do that because they don't have the money to be able to waste on a speculative buy. So as you're moving down the chain from these very large companies that can afford to buy and waste money and test things and find the one, invest in 100 different technology and find the one that works. As a small company, you have to pick one, and you've got to be lucky, and you really have to find that company that works well with you. And so among all of those scrappy companies with the single visionary, you have to meet the visionary, and you've got to talk to them, and you have to align their vision with your own vision. And if you as a company, as a retailer, don't have a vision, you're not going to be able to match it with that individual. And you're going to have to do a lot of hard work of just talking to all of the different potential suppliers to find the one that's going to work, or the two that are going to work well with you, because you can't afford to just, pick one up that goes that you might like. And as you're saying, there's a lack of, as I was saying, there's a lack sort of the mindset, but you're saying there's a lack of understanding and awareness and just the idea that, you don't know what you're doing, or you don't know what's going on. So you just pick something. And that's a dangerous sort of road to play. And eventually you need companies, I think, like yours, that go into companies and say, look, here's what we're doing. Here is this is not necessarily the product or the features, but it's more about the benefits to the company. So you're selling the benefits, and you're teaching and educating your customer base about how AI or machine learning or some interesting predictive analytic tools will help the company as a whole, rather than, oh, here's a specific feature that you need to fill in your, that's a long answer though, because I wanted to tell that story about plastic pickles, which I like.
That is a very interesting story. I didn't know that you could, actually make something up 1 penny, but very, very interesting. So yeah, thanks all for that. I think we're moving on to the end of the last question. So we've talked a bit about, the past kind of lessons that you've learned, as well as like current trends and everything going on, and all the different, from your career case studies. So now let's look into the future. So how do you actually foresee the future of retail and the Retailtech Solutions to evolve in the APAC region? And what kind of opportunities do you think will emerge from it? Maybe Brendan? We haven't heard from you.
I guess from what I'm seeing, my focus is really on the smaller merchants. So it's merging online to in-store, but it also applies to the larger merchants. It's the ability to exchange orders in store, return exchanges, etc. But the use of online to assist in-store purchases. Online's your influencer, and then in-store becomes the actual purchase. Woolworths in Australia recently said over 50% of their in-store purchases are digitally influenced from the online store. So that's an example of one of the biggest supermarket chains in Australia. I think virtual storefronts as well, acting as an influencer, not necessarily your key sales pipeline, but collecting the consumer information, personification, developing the persona of your consumer and learning more about their habits, of what they're looking at, what they're interested in. And that's your online experience. And for these smaller in-stores, it's how do I garner that? How do I bring them in? What can I learn about my customers, as opposed to just making a sale? I think Charles mentioned make a sale, cut margins. So again, looking at like Groupon, a lot of small merchants over here use Groupon to get their deals out, but that costs 50% of the margin after they've already discounted. So these things need to be developed further afield. I guess my view is the ability just to merge that whole seamless thing and look at mobile payments as well. Is there a way that we can change mobile commerce to make it so that orders can be escrowed or blockchain transactions that can add more detail to an image, like it appears in your bank account or appears in your accounting system with an image of what you purchased and the date and serial number, rather than just $69 from Walmart?
If I can build on one of the points that Brendan, you mentioned, which is that of consumer data and just personalization, I think that's very relevant for Southeast Asia as well. The context being here that we're seeing in e-commerce, just a lot more competition nowadays than before, both among the brands with the rise of young digital D2C brands that I talked about, and also among channels, which is the fragmentation of e-commerce, more marketplaces, more social commerce, etc. And the net impact of all of that competition is a downward pressure on prices. So the consumer who would spend $5–10 on a lipstick a few years ago, now just for the same amount of money has a lot more options available. And that means brands are having to work harder to cut through and therefore make a case for why their particular lipstick brand and product is the one, the right one for them. And really there, understanding who your customer is, having the right data for them, and then personalize the marketing messages to them becomes extremely important.
I don't have anything to add to Sarabjit and Brendan. I mean, they were both very eloquent in talking about personalization and talking about that offline to online. The only thing I would sort of mention that none of us have touched on is the idea of the big question today, which is about sustainability and consumer behavior. And I'm really of the mind that, you know, although we as consumers are made to feel guilty about our consumption, I think some of this is misplaced because there's a lot of overproduction, and the overproduction is of a greater magnitude than the overconsumption. And yes, we should try and, you know, reduce our consumption to that of which we enjoy, but it's not a one-way street, right? And so one of the things that I, haven't mentioned much about this, one of the things that Delvify is trying to do is take that online information that's coursing through the e-commerce site and use that to help the manufacturers understand the parts of the, the raw materials and the materials that are being used to construct the products, and maybe reduce a little bit of the production so that the unbought items are not made in the first place. And hopefully that will make it won't solve the problem, but hopefully it'll make it a little bit better.
Great. Thanks so much. So I think that's all for our questions. But I do see that we do have some questions from our audience. So maybe we can kickstart one of them. That's actually quite interesting. So it's a bit about data privacy. So yeah, the question is, how would business leaders like you guys look to protect your data, especially in a period where cyber threats are ever increasing? Who would like to maybe give some insight on that?
That's Sarah.
I'm no expert on this area, but I believe, and it's the way we structure our company, is moving your data to large cloud hosting centers. You'll see a number of the larger manufacturers are moving that too. Like we host all ours on AWS. We use their security and their systems rather than the older model from 10, 15 years ago, or even 5 years ago, of using a web hosting or a data hosting service provider, moving that to large companies, and then looking at your downstream suppliers. I mean, you have to know what data they have of you and how it's stored, and then so on and so on.
I really want to just emphasize that, Brendan. That's a really important point, is that if you think of, aside from human error, where you pick something up and give it to someone and leak it purposely, the recent attacks that you've seen on, Microsoft or other types of servers have all been local servers. The stuff in the cloud is completely secure. No one is able to, this is what the governments use as well. No one could break into these things. They're really, really safe. And if you're not already hosting your business in the cloud, please bite the bullet and do that. It will be the best thing you can do.
Echoing that point and adding one more point. So a good example is, for example, just spreadsheets. A lot of data gets exchanged through spreadsheets. You can, not to comment on Microsoft versus Google, but sending XLSX files via email that can then be forwarded to anybody is less secure than setting it up in a Google spreadsheet, where you can control who gets access, whether it's read access, write access, delete files, and the data gets deleted. Something as simple as that. That's cloud versus local storage. So that's the systems answer. There's also a processes and a mindset answer, which is for small companies. Sometimes it's just helpful to sit down and think through. Also for big companies, but it's big companies will have IT systems, etc. So they have to do that as well, which is for new employees, what are some of the guidelines that they need to follow, because these systems are only as secure as your people and how they will use them.
Great, thank you. We have another question. I think it's something about visual search. I believe Charles did mention that just now as well. So how quick has been the adoption of visual search, and how long do you project it to be the go-to way of finding what people want online?
It's really interesting. The adoption has not been as fast as we might wish. And I think part of it has to do with what I mentioned before, which is how many clicks are being, can I attribute to a sale? And there's obviously a very strong emphasis on looking at the sale and attributing the sale, and talking about attribution models is a whole seminar in and of itself, and who should be attributed for what. But it's clear that the visual search offers a premium experience and another way for customers to interact with your website. Using the mobile, they're offline, they see something, you can bring them online. And part of the reason that the adoption, I think, hasn't been as quick is that the knowledge of it has been relatively low, a little bit of a fear, right? It's, oh my God, this is some sort of AI. I don't know what it is about, and it's really, really scary. And there's just, there's not a whole lot of providers out there that are willing to work with a company and really, show them how it can really help their product. So in the future, yeah, I'm pretty sure that the adoption will continue apace. Right now, we're all in a tizzy about large language models and ChatGPT. And once that sort of dies down, then much more of that visual search, I think, will become important, because we're essentially visual creatures. And when we're talking about e-commerce, we're talking about a visual medium, right? There may be a little bit of audio that's coming through, but primarily it's about what you see.
Just to add one point on that, which is, I think for as long as it is a feature, its adoption might trundle along. But when this becomes really powerful is how it gets integrated into the user journey. So back to the example of TikTok Shop, it's really caught a lot of consumers' attention in just how it has merged the visual experience of live streaming and videos with the shopping experience. And visual search in of itself is interesting, but I think if we are seeing innovations in how the search get mixed in to the shopping journey in a more seamless way, I think that's when we really see the pickup. And just one point, I find it very interesting, Charles, you said once the AI hype dies down, it's as if it's gonna die down in your mind, it's not if.
That's funny. Brenton, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to that. As opposed to the visual, I mean, for me, that's a great tool, Charles, being able to say, I want that product, but I don't know who it is or who has it or what it is. And on the other side, I think with COVID, we've all seen a lot of people have reduced their travel. So it's, how do I find a product in a 50K radius around me? I know what I want, but I don't know what it looks like, which is kind of the opposite. So kind of the merging of those search features and say, well, here's a couple of products that it should look like, or take a picture of something similar, but I know what I want, I know what price point. So that adoption of AI and machine learning, Sarabjit said, the AI might change. I think machine learning integrating all of those functionality makes a big change to it. That'll bring the customer journey and the experience to, yay, I've got my shop in a pocket, I've got my Simon the assistant to give me what I want.
Perfect. Okay, we'll slowly start ending this. We do have one last question that's very specific to Charles. So how does Delvify measure sustainability for their product?
So this is a big question, and it's hard because sustainability is so undefined, and part of the problems with greenwashing, for example, is that no one really has a really good understanding of what it means to be sustainable in any way, because it embraces everything from water usage, chemical usage, energy usage, carbon, like which of those you focus on, or do you focus on all of them? So what we've tried to do is have a much smaller subset and look at sort of two things, what we call sort of sustainability ready. So as we're going forward, what's going to be happening, particularly with Europe in the lead, is there's a whole rash of legislative proposals that are going to be adopted over the next couple of years, particularly in terms of tracking of consumer products. And a lot of it is around the garment industry. So who is buying your product? How are you tracking it? Where does it go to end of life sort of? And what we're trying to do is help companies be sustainability ready by really doing two things. One is by attaching in a database a certificate to each of the products that someone has. Now, not all the products may have a certificate, but what that does is as they're being purchased, we can then record this product with this certificate that has, for example, this importance to your company was purchased, but this other one wasn't. So you can sort of see over time which of your products are being sold that are closer to your own definition of what sustainable is based on your own certifications. And the other is to try and find a way to reduce that overproduction before it gets to the retail shop itself. And that's a whole other discussion, but it's about trying to reflect what is being purchased in store to feed that information back to the manufacturer so they don't manufacture the stuff. And so you take your baseline of what was before and you sort of see, oh, right, our margins are increasing because our discounting is going down and our consumption rates are holding sort of steady.
Great. I mentioned that was the last question. But we actually have something quite interesting. I think it's for Saurabh. So with the rise of D2C, so direct to consumer, over the last few years in Southeast Asia, should we expect them to be a major part of the top 10 brands within each of the major categories or subcategories?
The short answer is yes. And in fact, it's already happening. So indeed, if you think of, let's just say, beauty as an example, within beauty, you've got subcategories, skincare, hair care. Within each of these, then you have subcategories. For sure, what you're saying is these D2C brands are like I said, coming up with very niche value propositions within these subcategories. They're responding to the consumers becoming more sophisticated with makeup routines that the consumers are understanding what their skin needs, for example, and then looking for those solutions. And third, in these local markets, Indonesia, Philippines, many of these D2C brands are local. Some are Chinese and international as well, but especially local brands are communicating in the local language with local influencers and doing that very well. So it's a host of different factors why these brands are chipping away at the market shares of these global brands for whom it's difficult because they were traditionally the leader, let's say, across all the subcategories, but now are facing this competition, which is not one, but kind of like death by 1,000 cuts. Well, death is a little extreme, but the point is the more of the 1,000 cuts, which is you've got many, many diverse groups to respond to. But that doesn't mean that they can't. I think if you think of the traditional incumbents, what it just means for them is the assortment needs to become more varied. So they are offering alternatives to these D2C brands in the specific categories and subcategories. And then the communication also needs to be more focused, personalized, and specific to these different products that they have to speak to that customer who's more sophisticated today.
Great. Thank you so much. So I think that concludes our webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us today and also tuning in to hear our panelists' insights into the market from all different areas of APAC. So massive thank you to our respective speakers, Brandon, Charles, and Saurabh, for their expertise today. So I'm very confident that the audience would actually gain, a very vivid picture of the market and the exciting future to come. So something that I'd like to know as well is that do keep an eye out for our ebook that'll be shared right after this webinar. And yeah, thank you so much, guys.
Honored to be a part of it. Thank you so much.
So thank you.